everyone here today. It is about 11 a.m. on November 16, 2024. Sorry, November 17, 2024. It is Sunday, November 17, 2024, about 11 a.m. We are here joining each other as a community to discuss spiritual subjects as we do usually on Sundays. We are so happy to have all of you to discuss this subject today, the preface to the Bible on the revelations of God. Now, this subject is something that we've spoken about at short length last week. And we also have a session that's going on at 2 p.m. at the moment that deals with the Old Testament. We recommend, if you're joining this session, that you definitely make it out to those sessions. They start at 2 p.m. You can go to clearwaterbahais.org, clearwaterbahais.org. Under the Activities and Events tab, we have the links for the various sessions and their times, as they are local to our location here in Florida. So it is about 11 a.m. in only 4 short hours. We're going to be already in the thick of it, discussing another subject in the Old Testament. That being said, we are so happy to have all of you here today. If you haven't already liked this page, please do, so that you can receive more videos. Subscribing makes that possible. With that being said, we want to introduce with us Mr. Peter Terry. Peter Terry is many things: author, teacher, scholar. That is some of them, besides the fact that he's an amazing opera singer. I've never introduced him as one, so here we go. He is an amazing opera singer. That being said, we are discussing today a subject from the Bible, and we are so happy to do this together because, as we know, we live among a lot of people who revere the Bible as a holy book, as do we Baha'is revere the Bible as a holy book. So what more better opportunity to study it than together discussing these important subjects within that book? So the
With
revelations
that
of
being
God
said,
are progressive and universal, serving the evolving needs of humanity across ages. This principle of progressive revelation underscores that divine guidance is revealed in stages, addressing the unique challenges of each era. As Baha'u'llah affirms, every age has its own needs, and the teachings of the manifestations of God serve as a remedy for the ailments of their time. So, the prophets and chosen ones of God reflect his attributes and act as conduits for humanity to attain the presence of God. Through them, the limitless meanings of God's word unfold, offering spiritual solutions to worldly problems. Baha'u'llah also reveals that divine guidance extends beyond specific religious laws to a universal revelation, visible in all creation, testifying to God's inner light. So, with that being said, these
exactly.
teachings invite us to engage deeply with sacred writings, seeking their hidden wisdom to advance not only personal understanding, but the collective understanding of civilization. With that being said, we are so happy to have Mr. Peter Terry with us today. We are going to start, and as soon as we have that sound check again, we're good to go. So, Peter, if you want to do
Hi,
test.
everyone.
There he is. All
Yep.
right.
Uh, all right. So you can see me now. You can hear me. Uh, now you can go and have your coffee. What I want to do is something that I've never done before because I usually don't have a small group like this. This reminds me of a wonderful story I was told. I went to school in San Francisco at the Conservatory of Music, wonderful institution that some of the best players in the world have been trained at. And one of my classmates was named Gidi Meir, and Gidi Meir was the son the grandson rather, of Golda Meir. Now, if that's not a familiar name to you, she was one of the first prime ministers of the state of Israel. And she came from Chicago. That was her place of birth. Anyway, the reason why I brought her up is that Giddy one time brought me over to his grandma's house where his dad and mom were living in Tel Aviv. And I walk into the kitchen, and it's a tiny kitchen, and there's a little round table there with a few chairs around it. It says, this is where the Israeli cabinet used to meet when Golda Meir was the prime minister. So I kind of feel like that with all of you this morning. We're around a little table, and because we're around a little table, I wanted to take a few minutes where each person would introduce themselves, give us a wave, and say where they live, where they are at this time. I know it'd be a real thrill for us to hear that. And so, if you will just in no necessary order, but if you just go from the top left and then go in rows down, then we won't end up talking over each other. Okay, so Molly, you start. So you have to unmute yourself. Or maybe we can, yeah.
Yeah, okay, now I got it. I'm Molly DeWald. I live in Galita. I've been a Baha'i 70 years, and it's been an exciting, wonderful journey in my life.
This is
So Molly,
Eileen.
where's Galita?
Oh, that's near Santa Barbara.
Where's Gal? Oh, it's near Santa Barbara. So she's in California. I'm in California. Kathleen, where are you?
Oh, by the way, born and raised in Brooklyn.
And you're still in Brooklyn?
No, I'm in Galita. No, born and raised there
Oh, you're
in Brooklyn, and I moved to California.
okay. But how about
1974.
Kathleen? Kathleen Love. Where are
Hi.
you?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Love and I live in Bellingham, Washington. I'm a transplant from Colorado, which is where I found the faith, in spite of the fact that I lived in Chicago for about 15 years, which was crazy. I never heard of the faith the whole time I was there. And I think that Molly echoed my sentiments exactly. Being a Baha'i has been an incredible thing in my life. I've been one since 1964.
Wow. Okay, John, you're next. Everybody wants to know who John is. Oh, I see somebody's popping up. Jael Nasimiyu. Go ahead, please.
Yeah,
I'm
introductions.
Jael Nasimiyu from Kenya. I have been a Baha'i for
Kenya.
around 10 years. Yeah.
That's exciting. I don't think we've ever had somebody from Kenya before. Not in any of my sessions. I'm really excited. All right, John, introduce yourself, Monsignor.
Hello, I'm John from Florida. It's nice to see all of you. We have some other Floridians here too, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our Floridian people are a little quiet here. Any Floridians want to speak
They
up?
are very quiet.
Yes.
All right. Maybe I'll call on people. How about Linda Long?
Hi,
She was
I
the
am
first
a
person to... Go ahead.
Oh, we got Gregory here from Florida. He unmuted.
I'm Linda Long, and I'm from Northwest Florida between Pensacola and Destin, the Gulf.
Awesome.
Nice to meet you, Linda. Welcome.
Thank you for
Nice.
having these wonderful programs.
So we just
Our
had Kim
pleasure.
Kennelly join from Florida. We got Gregory McKinney here in his car. He just unmuted.
We have Dean Martineau from Florida.
Dean Martineau. Nice to see you.
Yes, I am from Florida, indeed.
Good to see you, Dean. And where's Pamela Payne from?
Mute and video.
Where are you from?
I'm from St. Pete Beach, Florida. And
Oh,
I know John and I know some of the other Baha'is here. I became a Baha'i. I'm from Connecticut, but became a Baha'i in New York in January 4th, 1970. So that's that's it in a nutshell. It's been a great journey.
now Barbara, I think Barbara is from a place I used to live in. Barbara Kamali. She's not talking.
No,
All right, let's
I'm
see.
I'm originally from Wyoming, but now live in the Fort Lauderdale, Florida area. And I have been a Baha'i for 16 years.
All right, and let's see. Then we have somebody I've never seen before, Trezor Kabula. Interesting. Very interesting name. Who is Trezor Kabula and where are you located? But you don't have to respond. You know, we're all of us can. And then we've got George Masidian.
I think I have been in a lot of these
Someplace
meetings and so on. My name is Joe.
wonderful.
It's called Joe G. Mazidion, but by public I'm called George because of convenience. But my original name is Qudratullah, and I live in Bristol, in United Kingdom.
Bristol. Is Bristol part of Wales?
No, it is part of England.
It's part of England. Okay. Lovely. Glad to see you again. And then we have our friend Olga, who is from Russia. Listen, this is really an international group already. Kenya, Russia. Let's see who else. We have Soli. Where is Soli? Where are you from?
I'm from Massachusetts.
From Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in Massachusetts for many, many years. And then Eileen. Eileen is from the great state of
Vermont. After kind of globe trotting around, this is where I alighted. Burlington, Vermont.
And Terry McBride is the only one of us who actually has the state in which he's residing written beside his name. So good for him. And someday, Terry, you're going to have to tell me how to do that. I don't know how to do that with my computer. And then we have Rosine, who is from Germany. Where in Germany, Rosine?
Hello, I'm located in Rostock. It is in the north of Germany.
Oh, the north.
Yes, 2 hours from Berlin.
2 hours from Berlin.
Yeah.
And what time is it there?
It's 5:20 p.m.
Oh, that's reasonable time. That's reasonable. Okay, did we miss anybody who doesn't want to be missed? Yes, Gary. Gary, where are you?
Well, I am here. You can see me now. I'm in Ukraine.
Oh,
In Ukraine.
how are you?
Wow, you're a courageous man.
Well, I've been here many years.
You,
I,
s-
Exactly. That's why you're a courageous man.
well, I don't know how courageous that is. I left America in 1975, and I was in Africa, Asia, different places, and eventually I went to Russia, and then finally to Ukraine. And so I decided, enough for Ukraine. I've been here long enough. But absolutely, most people must understand that there's a war going on. I won't
yes.
I won't be able to stay so much on the internet because of the war, because sometimes things need to be
Yeah.
closed down. But anyway, it's a very important thing that we all need to understand for the future.
Yes. I have many colleagues that I work with regularly who are based in Dnipropetrovsk, which is a big city in Ukraine. And
What?
then I have other colleagues who used to be in Dnipropetrovsk, but because they are women, they were allowed to leave the country. And so they're living in Bulgaria and Ireland and all over the place.
Yes. Oh, great to hear.
There's a huge diaspora.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. And then we have another person. I think the last person here is Chiva. But maybe Jiva's is having coffee. So I'm going to jump in now, okay? I'm going to jump in. If there's anybody who hasn't spoken and introduced themselves and wants to, please do so immediately, and I'm going to share a document. So why I have two copies of, there we go. Okay. So the purpose of this session is to be an introduction to and a sort of a marketing tool to attract people to a series of sessions that I'm doing with my colleague, Eileen Maddox, who is also in our company, and she's the one from Vermont. And we're doing a presentation, 8 talks, the two of us, on the Pentateuch, on the first 5 books of the Bible, and looking at it from a different perspective than normally people do, because we're looking at it in comparison with the Baha'i writings, looking for what the Baha'i writings, the light they shed upon the meanings of the Old Testament and these particular 5 books of the Old Testament, and also what they the the significance of those books still today. And of course, 8 sessions of a couple of hours is not really enough to go into depth on a subject like the Torah. The Torah would require much more detail, but we wanted to do an introductory course first, and then, God willing, we'll do something much more in depth. We are planning to do a presentation on what are called in Hebrew the Nevi'im, the prophets, which are another book of the Bible that comes after a number of other books. The Bible is organized differently in Hebrew than it is in English and in the various Christian versions. So all the prophets are together in one book, with the exception of the ones who were not regarded as being really prophets. Maybe there was some doubt about whether they were full-fledged prophets, and then they got into another book. Daniel being one of those, David and Solomon being 2 of those as well. And Abraham, of course, and his sons are also regarded as prophets in the Quran and the Baha'i writings, but they are also in the book of Genesis rather than, well, no, I'm sorry, I'm confusing things for you. They are in the book of Genesis, which is actually the first book of the Pentateuch. So I'm going to be talking about a few general principles that help us to understand the meaning of these 5 books. And I invite you all to come back at 2:00 Clearwater time to delve into this subject in real depth. One of the first passages I wanted to cite for you is a response that Baha'u'llah gave to a question that was posed to him by the uncle of the Bab. And it pertained to the claim by many Muslim scholars, and therefore most Muslims at the time he was writing in the 19th century, that the Bible is not to be relied upon because it's been perverted. Its text has actually been defiled and corrupted. And this is a belief of many, many Muslims. And no, you. So this is a very widespread belief. And when you're talking about the second largest religion on the planet, with something like 2 billion followers, and most of them believing that the sacred book of the Jewish people and the Christian people is corrupted, is perverted, has been falsified, then this is a major problem for interfaith understanding, and it has been now for about 1400 years. So Baha'u'llah has a very succinct response to this. He says, verily, by perverting the text is not meant that which these foolish and abject souls have fancied, even as some maintain that Jewish and Christian divines have effaced from the book such verses as extol and magnify the countenance of Muhammad, and instead thereof have inserted the contrary. How utterly and vain and false are these words! Can a man who believeth in a book and deemeth it to be inspired by God mutilate it? Moreover, the Pentateuch had been spread over the surface of the earth and was not confined to Mecca and Medina, so that they could privily corrupt and pervert its text. So 2 arguments that Baha'u'llah cites there that refute this contention that has been held to by millions and now billions of Muslims who believe that these holy books of both the Christians and the Jews are not accurate, that they have been altered. And of course, if a holy book can be altered in one way, it can be altered in any way. So one argument he has is that, can a man who believeth in a book and deemeth it to be inspired by God mutilate it? So clearly he's pointing out it's not possible for somebody who believes in the sacredness of a text to change that text for any reason. And the second reason being that this book has been if you will, sent all over the world, not just by the Jewish people and the Christian people, but it's also been published in many, many languages. And so it was not confined to one place where, because the contention was that the rabbis who lived in Mecca and Medina had changed the text of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, so that it would not refer to Muhammad. So he says it's not possible. This is a book that's been spread all over the world. So that's his second argument. And this is a kind of very succinct response to questions that Baha'u'llah displays not only in the Kitab-i-Yagan. The Kitab-i-Yagan is actually an extraordinary collection of answered questions. In that sense, it's very much like Baha'u'llah, like Abdu'l-Baha's Some Answered Questions, except that Some Answered Questions was written down from conversations that took place over a period of about 2 years, whereas this book was revealed by Baha'u'llah in 48 hours. So the second theme I wanted to bring to your attention, and this first theme is very important because in this short paragraph here, Baha'u'llah is removing an obstacle to interfaith understanding, an obstacle to interfaith dialogue, and removing a cause of prejudice, of hatred, and of conflict between people that has existed for 1400 years. He removes it with this passage. If, God willing, people actually read it and take it into their consideration. And by the way, when Baha'u'llah revealed these verses, he was not revealing them for a Baha'i, nor was he really revealing them for a Babi. He was revealing them for a Muslim, because this uncle of the Bab did not believe that the Bab was the manifestation of God, did not, and he had no concept that Baha'u'llah was the manifestation of God. However, after he read this book from cover to cover, he became a Babi, and then as soon as Baha'u'llah declared, he became a Baha'i. So this was a very powerful teaching tool, and we should regard it as such, all of us, both for teaching ourselves and for teaching all those around us. We should never fear that the soul of another person is not ready to read the Kitab-i-Yagan, because we don't know until they do it. A second principle here is there was a very widespread belief, and still is among Muslims, that the actual text, the original text, what in Arabic is called the mother book of the gospel, did not exist among the Christians. And why? Because they said, well, there aren't any specific references, clear, literal references to Muhammad and to the revelation of Muhammad in the Gospels. So therefore, they must have been taken out. And so the Christians can't have the original gospel, the divine text of the gospel, and what they must have is sort of a facsimile, but not a good one that has lots of things left out. And this is what Baha'u'llah's argument is, to reject that contention. We've also heard a number of the foolish of the earth assert that the genuine text of the heavenly gospel doth not exist amongst the Christians, that it hath ascended unto heaven. How grievously they have erred. How oblivious of the fact that such a statement imputeth the gravest injustice and tyranny to a gracious and loving providence. How could God, when once the day star of the beauty of Jesus had disappeared from the sight of his people and ascended into the fourth heaven, cause his holy book, his most great testimony amongst his creatures, to disappear also? What would be left to that people to cling to from the setting of the day star of Jesus until the rise of the sun of the Mohammedan dispensation? What law could be their stay and guide? How could such people be made the victims of the avenging wrath of God, the omnipotent avenger? How could they be inflicted with the scourge of chastisement by the heavenly King? Above all, how could the flow of the grace of the all-bountiful be stayed? How could the ocean of his tender mercies be stilled? We take refuge from God, from that which his creatures have fancied about him. Exalted is he above their comprehension. Now, this passage is full of stumbling blocks for modern readers. First of all, the style is not modern, let's put it that way. There are many terms being used here that we wouldn't necessarily know the meaning of, because we wouldn't encounter them in our regular reading, or certainly not in conversation either. Now, not everybody sits down when they're reading a book and looks up every word. And even if they were to look up every word, then you have to consider, what does it mean in this particular context? So I have to tell you that when I first encountered the Baha'i writings, when I was 19, I would read a passage like this and I would feel drunk. I would literally feel as if I was inebriated, but I had no idea what it was saying. And it's taken me quite a long time to be able to read Baha'u'llah and understand directly what he's saying, because I know the language now. I know the language he uses. And I'm so grateful to the Guardian for having done this magnificent translation that conveys so much of the beauty of the language used by Baha'u'llah in Persian and Arabic. This text is originally in Persian. So let's get to the real nugget here. The real essence of what he's conveying here is that, as in with the previous citation, he's saying the conventional understanding of why it is that there are no clear references or obvious references to Muhammad in the Gospels is not that the original text of the Gospels disappeared, went up to heaven, and what we're left with here on earth is not really the real thing. You know, it's missing out on lots of its characteristics, important characteristics. He says that's completely unreasonable, because how could Jesus have left his followers without his testimony, his true testimony, right? When he left, and he did, he's ascended up to heaven, then what are they supposed to go by? What is supposed to guide their behavior for the hundreds and hundreds of years that would happen, and until the dawn of the dispensation of Muhammad and the revelation of the Quran? But he says it's not possible. That's an awful thing to even contemplate, ascribing to God that he would allow that to happen. So it's nonsense. Exalted is he above their comprehension, is what he says, right? We take refuge with God from that which his creatures have fancied about him. And then he also points out that, you know, there in the scriptures, they explain to us that when we do what is good, we are rewarded, and when we do what is not good, we are punished. That's the law of the universe. That's how it works. In all the scriptures, it explains that there is reward and punishment. Without reward and punishment, there is no society. There is no religion, really. And so his second point is that how could God punish the bad misbehavior of the people if they didn't have access to the true gospels? So these are very powerful arguments that Baha'u'llah is marshaling to say that the prevailing views at the time amongst the Muslim people were simply wrong, and that the scriptures that have been revealed by the manifestations are true and complete and verifiable. And that is why they have been such a great guide for humanity for thousands of years. One of the further signs of the high regard that he held these scriptures is the fact that he cited them all over the place. In many of his writings, Baha'u'llah cited prophecies that are fulfilled by himself, including in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, which was his last major work. In that work, he cites a number of the Israelite prophets, including Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, Joel, and Amos. And he also cited prophecies of David, who is regarded a prophet in the Quran and in the writings of the Bab, and to whom are attributed in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam the Psalms and various other writings, including revelations from God. So why would he cite those passages? And very often he's citing specific verses. And how do we know that? Because we've been able to trace the exact wording from the verses that he cited in his tablets. And I'm talking, when he quoted from the Bible, he quoted always in Arabic in most of his writings. And the Arabic that he's quoting is from a specific translation which was published in 1860, and it was created by two Presbyterian missionaries. It was a translation of the Bible from the King James Version into Arabic. And he quoted word for word what the prophets had said in Arabic from that translation. Also, another point is that his accounts, Baha'u'llah's accounts, in the Kitab-i-Iqan and in other writings, in the Gems of Divine Mysteries, which was written a little bit before Kitab-i-Iqan, he tells the stories of many of the prophets, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and then also he mentions in two of his tablets that have been translated. One is called the Tablet of Wisdom. The other one is called the Tablet of the Uncompounded Reality, Lo'i Basit al-Hakika. And these two, the Lo'i Hikmat, the Tablet of Wisdom, has been translated, and it's one of the books in the Tablets of Baha'u'llah written after the Kitab-i-Aqdas. Wonderful book, absolutely fabulous book, written to one of his major followers who was an expert in philosophy and theology. And in that book, he talks about Enoch, who was regarded in Jewish tradition, in some Christian traditions, and very clearly also in Islamic traditions, as being a prophet. And as you may know, Enoch doesn't get much coverage in the Bible, like two sentences. He walked with God and then he was taken up to God. That's what it says. But these other sources, in particular, the Muslim commentators, have insisted that Enoch was a prophet and a very important one. And we'll come back to that sometime. Another thing to point out is that the references by Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi to the Hebrew prophets all over the place. And why would they be cited if they weren't reliable? I mean, these are all stories that we know to be of great importance for humanity as models of basically correct behavior and and of the covenant between God and humanity, where God is constantly feeding us spiritually and looking out for us in exchange for our obedience and our efforts made to understand his will. So I'm going to switch to another thing now, because I think that has been hopefully clearly demonstrated. Another passage is quite extraordinary. It's found in a tablet addressed to Abdul Razak, who was one of the early Baha'is, and it's found in Gleanings. And it talks about the Adam who came, the prophets of God who preceded Adam. What? All right. Now we've got something on our hands, because of course the Bible starts with the story of Adam. So everybody who's Jewish and Christian assumes that's the first guy, right? But here he's being asked a question about the prophets that preceded Adam, the father of mankind, or of the kings that lived in the days of those prophets. Now that in itself, that question should have our heads reeling. Wait a second, he told us that the Bible is totally reliable and that it's a testimony from God. And how could it be falsified by people who believe in it? And how could it be wrong? Because if it's wrong, then it means that nobody could be held accountable for following its teachings if it's wrong. Otherwise, God is not God. He's Satan, because he's wicked and he's punishing us for something that we didn't know about. And here we have a reference to prophets that preceded Adam, which means, and then kings who lived at the days of those prophets. That means there were prophets, there were kings, there were human beings. Wait a second, Adam's the father of mankind, but there were people living there before him. I know this is an extraordinary thought, okay? But here, this is what Baha'u'llah opens up to us, a vista of religious history that we in the West, and particularly Jews and Christians, were not cognizant of until archaeology brought it to our attention. It was material science that initially brought it to our attention. But in the East, among the Muslim people, particularly the philosophers, they figured out that there were prophets before Adam. And here they're talking about the Adam who's estimated to have lived around 6,000 years ago, about 4,000 BC. So what does that tell us? One of the things it tells us is that there's more than one Adam. Now, how can that be? That sounds very confusing, but let's look at what the word Adam means. Adam means man. That's what it means, man. So there was a man, okay? There was a man, and he must have been the father of human beings in some sense. But there were men that preceded that man. Now, in one of his books called The Seven Proofs, the Bab talks about an Adam who existed 13,000 years ago. And in the Persian Bayan, another of his writings, he talks about an Adam that existed 12,000 years ago. Now, I want to give you a little token of what Eileen is going to talk about, because what Eileen has discovered in her study of archaeology is that we now know about civilizations that preceded the oldest civilizations we ever knew about when we were kids. Remember, they used to say the oldest civilizations around were the ones in Mesopotamia, and they were about 6,000 BC. Now, she'll probably correct my dates on that because I'm not the best at dates. But in any case, they found older ones. And this is very interesting how Baha'u'llah answers this question. He says, "Know thou that the absence of any reference to them is no proof that they did not actually exist." Isn't that interesting? In other words, you didn't see anything written about these prophets. That doesn't mean they didn't exist. And what he's talking about is the literature that was available to people at that time in the 1800s. There have been certain records that have been found in stone and pottery and so forth by archaeologists over the course of the last 200 years. But to what extent were those records translated, deciphered, first of all, from whatever language they were written in, and then translated into a language that other people could understand, and then published in such a way that everybody would know about them? You see, our consciousness of history, and particularly what we call prehistory, has been extremely limited for most of our existence. And it's only really in the last century or so that we've seen this field grow at a fantastic rate. So Baha'u'llah is responding to this question in a very rational manner. Know thou that the absence of any reference to them is no proof that they did not actually exist. That no records concerning them are now available should be attributed to their extreme remoteness, as well as to the vast changes which the earth hath undergone since their time. Moreover, such forms and modes of writing as are now current amongst men were unknown to the generations that were before Adam. There was even a time when men were wholly ignorant of the art of writing and had adopted a system entirely different from the one they now use. And then he lets his reader off the hook. He says, for a proper exposition of this, an elaborate explanation would be required. I cite this particular verse because I think it's really important for us to consider, to read, and to think about and reflect and do research related to the statements that Baha'u'llah makes about those things that we're not familiar with, because it's going to be a study of those things that are unfamiliar that are going to ultimately help us to understand what we thought we understood about the Bible. See, because what we thought the Pentateuch was telling us, the stories in the Pentateuch, was the long tradition in whatever religious background we were born into and educated into. That's what we were taught. We were taught a theology, a dogma, a catechism. This is what this means. Baha'u'llah blows this up. Baha'u'llah over and over again is saying, don't rely on tradition. Remember, he already addressed tradition in Islam, which said that the Torah, that the Pentateuch, that the Bible, both the Old Testament and New Testament, are not reliable. It's not the real story. You know, it's been perverted. It's been corrupted. This is what people believed. He says, don't believe them. It's not true. And so you have this opening of consciousness that says, what I was told before is wrong. What I was told before in this case is that before Adam, there wasn't any human being. Human beings didn't exist at all before Adam. And now you're telling me that they did. There was a pre-existence, that humanity has existed longer. This opens the doors, and it opens the doors through revelation, which then are being opened at the same time through science. So we're seeing science and revelation doing the same thing, which is opening the doors to our consciousness. And without the opening of these doors, we wouldn't be capable of appreciating that the people who live in another country and speak another language and follow another religion and eat different food are actually human beings. Because you don't have to go back very far in time before we didn't regard those people out there as people. They weren't people. They were some kind of inferior creature. This was the general concept of most of my ancestors, the first of whom came over on the Mayflower. When they arrived here, they encountered Native Americans, and the Native Americans saved their lives, by the way. That's what Thanksgiving is all about. We thank God that the tribes here taught us how to fish, how to hunt, how to grow corn, how to basically live off the land, because if they hadn't taught it to us, we'd be dead. All of us would be dead. But we weren't, for a brief moment, those ancestors of mine regarded the Native Americans as human beings because they saved their lives. Okay. So they realized we're grateful, but it didn't take long before they went back, when the next generation, perhaps, or the next shipment of Europeans came over who didn't have that experience, whose lives were not saved by the Indians, just saw them as an annoyance. They don't look like us. They don't talk like us. They don't eat like us. So they can't be fully human. And if they're not human, then they're potentially a danger, because then also at that time, our minds were full of these ideas that there were either divine beings or there were satanic beings. All the ministers and priests in the world at that time were teaching that this world was full of devils. Not just the next world, but this world was full of devils. You got to really watch out. And so it was very easy for us to think, well, the Native American people are too different from us to be really human. They must be demonic. And of course, this kind of prejudice was not just amongst European people. No, not at all. It was a universal prejudice, and we still haven't kicked it either. We run into it all the time, is this idea that some group of people is inferior to us because they're not like us. They're different. Now, I want to go into a topic that is very important because it's going to bear closely on our understanding of the Pentateuch and of spiritual texts in general. Around the 16th century, there was a gradual movement in Europe to adopt a new form of analysis of the text of Scripture, of the Bible. That's what it was, the Old and New Testaments. And this new method was based not on faith and tradition. That's what the Roman Catholic Church had kept going for a long, long time. And it trained priests to follow that tradition very closely. That was the premium that was required of you, is that you adhere to what your ancestors had taught you. And the same thing was true of Muslims. The same thing was true of Jews at the time. So about the 16th century, you start to have this movement that started in the study of scripture, which complemented a movement that was happening in science. In science, they were discovering things like the earth is moving around the sun rather than the sun is moving around the earth, and lots of other lovely things that we take for granted because, we were brought up to know those things. But at that time, they had completely different notions about how the world worked and what cause and effect were. And frankly, although the ancient Greeks had made some considerable progress, and then their writings were translated into Arabic, and so there were a lot of Muslim scholars and scientists who had developed these. In Europe, the church had a stranglehold on all intellectual life. And for centuries and centuries, they didn't allow people to introduce new ideas. So in any case, in around the 16th century, there were scholars who started to experiment with actually thinking about the text, looking at it, and saying, what does this remind me of? Where could this have come from? In other words, they were looking for not something beyond the mystical and the divine revelation, because they've been taught divine revelation for a very long time. And now they needed to find out, are there human factors involved? And if so, what are those factors? By the way, I'm taking a minute to say, this is my younger daughter, Ava, who is appearing and disappearing in the video. Don't hold still so that they can see you. This is Ava. And Ava is how old?
5.
She's 5. Oh my gosh. She's 5. I thought she was 4. All right. Go ahead.
I love
Oh,
you.
baby. I love you. So this new method of studying scripture did two things. Essentially, one thing is it enabled people to see what was the various meanings in scripture in a completely different way. So it broke the bonds of orthodoxy. It broke the bonds of the church, the authority of the church as the only source of true interpretation. And the second thing that it did is that it gradually undermined the authority of revelation itself. And so when this happened, initially it was restricted to Europe. But then, as it became more and more powerful of a movement, and as it was complemented with the study of science, physical science, and the development of technology, it started to have a significant influence on other parts of the world, including in Iran. So here we have this tablet of wisdom that's sent by Baha'u'llah to one of his followers. And he talks about how the people of his day are captivated by the arts and wonders of the West, roved distraught in the wilderness of material causes, oblivious of the one who is the causer of causes and the sustainer thereof. And Abdul Wahab talked about the same principle in Secret of Divine Civilization, where he says, all the peoples of Europe, notwithstanding their vaunted civilization, sink and drown in this terrifying sea of passion and desire, and that is why all the phenomena of their culture come to nothing. These are very strong statements, and we should feel very uncomfortable with them, because what are they doing? They're showing that our culture is superficial. Our culture is only about the material. We abandoned the spiritual is basically what happened. And we've been abandoning the spiritual for a long time. And it started with a few individuals, and then it became more and more common. And one of the challenges that Baha'u'llah brings is to say, in order to have a unity of science and religion, we have to have balance between science and religion. And bye-bye, sweetie. We need to have a balance between science and religion. And the balance is way off kilter in the West. In the West, we have gone so far towards honoring and trusting the material that we've, in effect, abandoned the spiritual.
Dad, have you seen my rose skates anywhere?
No, I haven't seen your rose skates anywhere. And in abandoning the spiritual, it's been a gradual thing, as with all movements in history. I mean, it's been going, sometimes people talk about materialism as if it was a problem of the 20th century or the 21st century. And you have to really consider. Go back to this French Revolution. The people who were leading the French Revolution were every bit as materialistic as anybody is today. They had completely abandoned their Catholic faith, their Christian faith, because for them, the only Christianity was Catholicism. They had completely abandoned any confidence in all of the institutions that were related to the church and to the authority of the literature that had sustained them for hundreds of years. None of that meant anything anymore. And that's why when Robespierre called for basically the destruction of everything that pertained to the ancien regime, to the old regime, then the people loved the idea because they'd already abandoned it in their hearts. They no longer believed in it. So both Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha were absolutely insisted. This is a lack of balance that has to be redressed. We need to go back and revive the spiritual, but we have to revive it in a different way. We have to revive it in its purity. We can't add to it all kinds of human ideas that are simply wrong, because this was the problem. When I say that Muslims believed that the Bible, the Old and New Testaments, were perverted, were corrupted, and when they believed that the Gospels, the true text of the Gospels, were in heaven and not on earth, these did not come from the Quran. These were not teachings of Muhammad. These were teachings of the religious officials, the religious leaders, who interpreted certain verses in this way, and then believed that this was the only correct interpretation, and everybody had to interpret them that way. So I want to point to you some in a certain direction that has direct relevancy for the study of the Bible. Now, this is found in a tablet addressed to Ethel Rosenberg, who was one of the first British Baha'is. And Abdu'l-Baha is describing the sources for ancient history. Okay? And this is relevant because, of course, what is the Bible all about? Ancient history, right? It's not about modern history. It's not even about the history that we have historians writing about, whether it's Roman, Greek historians. Most of it happened long before they existed, many centuries before. This is what Abdu'l-Baha writes in this tablet. He says, nevertheless, Holy Writ, meaning the scriptures, is authoritative. And without it, I misspelled that word. Without it, no history of the world can compare. For experience has shown that after investigation of the facts and a thorough study of ancient records and corroborative evidence, all establish the validity of God's universal manifestation. Once his claim proveth true, then whatsoever he may choose to say is right and correct. Now, I'm going to read the next part so that you understand what the context in which he's making that statement. He says the histories prior to Alexander, which were based on oral accounts current among the people, were put together later on. There are great discrepancies among them, and certainly they can never hold their own against the Holy Writ. It is an accepted fact among historians themselves that prior to this time, history was transmitted by word of mouth. Note how extremely confused was the history of Greece, so much so that to this day, there is no agreement on the dates related to the life of Homer, Greece's far-famed poet. Some even maintain that Homer never existed at all, and that the name is a fabrication. This is also a call to redress the balance, because at this time in the West, and that's what he was referring to in this tablet to Rosenberg, is there were all these scholars of history who were making lots of claims about the Bible, the accuracy of the Bible as a historical document, as a testament to historical events, and lots of opinions about other sources of history. And what is Abdu'l-Baha saying? He says, don't discount the value of scripture. Don't discount it. Balance. Yes, look into other sources, but also understand that something that has existed this long and been relied upon by people for this long needs to be taken very seriously. Now, I wanted to point out that there was a great scholar of the life of Jesus, and his name was Dr. Adalbert. What was his name? It wasn't. No, it was not Adalbert. I'm sorry. It was Schweitzer. Okay. And Schweitzer was a great scholar. It started out as a musician. He wrote books about Johann Sebastian Bach, the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, and he played organ, and he was one of the great performers on the organ. And then he studied the life of Jesus, and Albert Schweitzer wrote probably the most important book about the historical sources for the life of Jesus. But Albert Schweitzer was a balanced person because Albert Schweitzer believed in God. And he believed from his scholarship and not just dogmatically that the Bible is telling stories that actually happened. And he said that in his book on the historical study of the life of Jesus, he said that when you compare the rationale presented by those who adopt the mythical statement, saying that Jesus is a myth, wasn't really a human being, and his early followers also not really real. This is all made up. You compare that with the people who take a historical approach, who believe it's historically sound. It says that it comes out in favor of the historicists, because it is only when you have an innate prejudice against scripture as a source, and you discount it and you don't look at it carefully, that you would make a decision that it's irrelevant and has no bearing on actual reality. This is, again, I'm citing Albert Schweitzer, but Albert Schweitzer, writing in 1910, The Quest of the Historical Jesus, and he's writing a book that had tremendous influence at the time. But it was an unusual book because it was written by an unusual man. It was written by a man who had not abandoned faith in the Bible or faith in Jesus. Not at all. He considered it part of reality and found good reasons to support that in his research. Now, this idea that it is the human ideas that get it wrong, rather than the ideas that actually are revealed by the prophets, is something that's also described in one of the talks of Abdu'l-Baha. It's actually a talk in which he's encouraging the Baha'is to study the Old and New Testaments. And he's explaining that, for the most part, the meanings of the words and what they're describing have meanings that require a great deal of reflection. They do not fit into a black and white formula. And this is, of course, the real problem, is that when you've been reading scripture and you've been told by religious officials whom you regard as being essentially inerrant, you really believe that they don't make mistakes. You trust them fully. When you trust them this fully, they take advantage of that fact, and they acquire certain traditional ways of understanding things, and then they continue to teach people those traditional understandings, and they don't bother to explain to you why they arrived at that, because they probably don't even know. They simply learned that in seminary. They were taught that dogma in seminary, and nobody dared question the professor when he said, this is the true meaning of this. And then here Abdu'l-Baha is talking about what happened when the Jews of the time of Jesus encountered Jesus. It says the Jews read the Old Testament night and day, memorizing its words and texts, yet without comprehending a single meaning or inner significance. For had they understood the real meanings of the Old Testament, they would have become believers in Christ, inasmuch as the Old Testament was revealed to prepare his coming. I think this is a very, very powerful argument, and a very powerful argument that we have to put to work, so to speak, in our study of these scriptures, of these ancient books, is to understand that we cannot restrict ourselves to the fixed dogmatic thinking of any generation of people. We have to look, and this brings us back to this seminal principle of Baha'u'llah. See with your own eyes rather than through the eyes of another. Independent investigation of reality. We are responsible, each one of us, to search and find ourselves and not do what humanity has been doing for so many millennia, which is rely on middlemen.
Daddy, can you hold my pinky?
Rely on the middlemen. Okay, I'm going to pause because Eileen and I are going to be talking at 2:00, and I'm going to invite you to ask questions, issue challenges, propose other perspectives as you wish.
Naomi stepped on
Here.
my pinky. And she
There,
stepped
you are cured, my dear.
on her roller skates.
It's okay, baby. You are cured. I promise you. You are cured. I have kissed your pinky and it is now fully recovered. So I'm going to stop share so that I can see all of your hands. Hands, where are the hands? All right, Terry. I knew Terry was going to ask a question. Go for it, Terry.
I got several. Let's see.
Uh-oh.
Talk about other Adams and Eves.
Yeah.
Where did you say you found that? I mean, I'd like to see that. Also, another thing too, there was talk about previous civilizations. Before I became a Baha'i, a friend of mine who was I think he was a theosophist. This was back around 1970 something. And there were discussions that there was an advanced Egyptian civilization that was in, I guess, according to a legend, called the Lost Continent of Atlantis. Is there any thoughts on that? Also, another thing, too, I mean, the Earth is over 4 billion years old, and it seems to me we could have had an advanced civilization long before now. I mean, it seems to me, I mean, 1 billion years is a long time. 1 billion years is a long time. I mean, the solar system itself is over 14 billion years old, but the Earth is only 4 billion years old. It seems to me, okay, there's a lot of information gaps that, to me, that need to be addressed. Do you have any thoughts of those?
Sure. So I'll quote back to you what Baha'u'llah says, which is the fact that there's no mention of those previous civilizations in writing, he's talking about in writing, doesn't mean they didn't exist. And in fact, in one of his tablets, it's called the Loy Bayan of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah talks about prehistoric civilizations. And he actually says, and this I think is really an important point. He says, be concerned about the world in which you live in and the time in which you live in. So I don't think that that is his advice to people. It's not just to this one individual. Don't be preoccupied with what happened before. Be attentive to the time you live in. Get on with it, because the time we live in is a new cycle. It's not just a new dispensation. We've entered a new cycle of human development. And, you know, Baha'u'llah talks a lot about that. And of course, Abdul Baha and Chogi Effendi do as well. And the idea that there were cycles that existed previously, Abdul Baha goes into it in some detail, but he doesn't go into it with detail by telling us where to find the remains, right? Where are you going to find the, you know, now, as far as finding remains, this is something Eileen has done a lot of study on. We're finding them every day. I mean, archaeologists are finding them all the time. Because I've lived in Israel, I keep pretty close tabs on what's going on archaeologically in Israel. It's mind-blowing. Every single time they go and they do some excavation to widen a road or build a building or make a dam, they run into a city that they didn't know existed. It's absolutely amazing. And every single time they make those discoveries, they're making discoveries about things they didn't know about. They simply were hidden from view. They were underground, basically. And but you know, above ground, this is something that I noted a number of years ago, is because some of the folks that were really into esoteric things were big into the pyramids and the supposed prophecies that the pyramids were making about the future and so forth. But to me, the greatest proof of great civilizations in the past were the pyramids themselves. You know, people have studied the rock that those are made of, and there's no possibility that people could have hewn rock like that and put it together without very advanced technology. No way. And there's no way they could have created something that perfectly aligns. And I'm not talking about one story. I'm talking about way up there, huge buildings. And then inside those buildings, there were all these cavities, places where there were tombs and so forth, and ways to get in and out. I mean, clearly, those people had very highly advanced understanding of engineering and architecture and physics. And like Baha'u'llah put it,
It wasn't a tomb.
because just because we
I'm
don't
not
have
gonna
anything
believe
written
that.
down about it doesn't mean it's not true, you know?
No.
And by the way, this is true also in many other parts of the world. We have found the most extraordinary ruins in Latin America, in Africa. I mean, I've seen photographs of things that I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't, you know, seen it myself. They just attested to a level of engineering skill and understanding that was way beyond what we thought people had. And I also love the fact that Baha'u'llah wants us to have respect for the people who have lived in the past and not think that we're such hot things that we've invented everything that's important. That's part of our arrogance as people living in the modern age, is we think the modern age is it, you know. Well, we have AI. So what? I mean, I mean, literally, people who lived thousands years ago might very well have as much knowledge or more knowledge than we do. It was just different. And a lot of it is hidden. So Jeremiah is making known his face, which has a meaning.
Yes,
And that meaning is
unfortunately, we
probably
have
to
to,
remind me.
yeah, we have to close up this session because we have to be back in an hour and a half for the 2 p.m.
Okay, so I hope to Terry, you and I will talk more. And
Well, I don't think I'll be able to
I
make
look
the
forward
1 or
to
2 o'clock meeting because I got an LSA meeting to go to. But if you guys are still online after we get done with the LSA meeting, we'll have a discussion.
Well,
But-
it also just, you should also know that that these meetings are all not just live streamed, they're recorded
Yeah.
and they will be on YouTube. Okay?
Okay.
Great seeing you all.
All right. Have
All
a
right.
great afternoon, everyone. We'll see you all back here at 2 p.m.